Welcome back to New Rockstars. I'm Erik Voss, and this is a complete recap of the timeline, the history, and everything you need to know about Sony's Venom franchise heading into Venom: The Last Dance. We are going to go through 2018's Venom, 2021's Venom: Let There Be Carnage, the Venom scenes in Spider-Man No Way Home, and really, Sony's just general approach to Venom ever since 2007 Spider-Man 3, through sightings even in the animated Spider-Verse films, and what the plan for the symbiotes and their god Null beyond The Last Dance could be. Because while it may be The Last Dance for it's not The Last Dance for no. By the way, we have some amazing Marvel-themed holiday gift options at nerdriot.shop, from our symbiotic face-off shirt, or if you're following Agatha and don't mind a bit of a joke on your chest, a boner family reunion shirt. Both of them are the best way to support New Rockstars. Again, nerdriot.shop. Okay, so Tom Hardy as Eddie Brock Venom arrived in our lives in 2018 with the first Venom solo film directed by Ruben Fleischer. We later learned that this movie was set in Universe 688, or perhaps 688B. According to some people keeping track of all of this online, it's kind of hard to know because while the Marvel Wiki suggests that this is the same universe as the events of Madam Web, which are set in the year 2003, Madam Web director S.J. Clarkson has stated that Madam Web is in its own world. But the 2018 film was in many ways a product of and a response to the history of Venom, both on page and on screen, in the decades leading up to that point. So let's quickly recap how we got even here. Venom actually traces his history back to Secret Wars. Now don't get too excited about a Tom Hardy Venom cameo in Avengers Secret Wars. I suppose it's not impossible. But in 1982, a comic reader named Randy Schueller wrote into Marvel pitching a new black Spider-Man suit, and then Marvel editor-in-chief at the time, Jim Shooter, sent Schueller a letter back announcing they were moving forward with that idea and included a check for $220. Marvel artists and writers like John Byrne, Roger Stern, Tom DeFalco, and Ron Frenz were all working on various ideas around this self-healing alien suit, and this black Spider-Man suit first appeared with the white logo in 1984's Secret Wars number 8, and it was later established that this suit was actually made up of an alien symbiote that attached to Peter Parker while he was on his way back to Earth from the Beyonders battle arena in the Secret Wars crossover event. And this suit made Peter way more aggressive. In DeFalco and Friends' Amazing Spider-Man run, Reed Richards examines his suit and realizes that this symbiote is vulnerable to fire and sonic energy. Years after this, in 1988, David Michelinie and Todd McFarlane conceived Venom in his Eddie Brock incarnation using elements from the 1985 Sin Eater storyline. Eddie Brock was a rival journalist who was humiliated by Peter Parker professionally, and then he inherited the Venom symbiote as it detached from Peter in that iconic church bell tower. So during this period in the late 80s and early 90s, Venom ended up being a big hit for the Marvel brand. Really what was happening was there was a generation of kids who had discovered Marvel during a very popular period, the 1980s Chris Claremont run of X-Men stories that are now being adapted into shows like X-Men 97. And so now at the end of the 80s, going into the 90s, those kids were now teenagers, seeking an edgier, less sanitized, and just visually more eye-popping characters in Spider-Man's world. And I believe Venom is like the perfect reflection of this point in the Marvel Comics history. In 1993, Marvel released Venom: Lethal Protector, a story that reconceived Venom from a New York-based villain to Spider-Man to more of an anti-hero in the San Francisco Bay Area. And that is really what has inspired the Tom Hardy run of the character. Now, I bring up this whole history because Venom isn't just a Spider-Man associated character. His entire appearance, his look, his anatomical structure, his power set, the concept of what he is are meant to be derivative of Spider-Man, directly linked to him, and in a way dependent on him. That's why Venom has that white chest emblem, the round humanoid head with the big white eyes, and he zips around cities with an inky version of Peter Parker's webbing. And I think that's always been an issue with the Tom Hardy take on the character. This is not like the HBO series The Penguin, where you can easily explore a villain as his own man without needing the focal superhero to be part of the story. It has never really made sense for Venom to take the form of this hulked out humanoid Spider-Man type character if he's never been attached to Spider-Man at all. Therefore, as we will see with Tom Hardy's Venom, these films have always felt like they are missing something, and have really been so successful just based on Tom Hardy's performance as both versions of the character, and arguably have felt the most like the Venom that fans know from the comics in the Let There Be Carnage post-credit scene. But back in the 90s, the success of Venom as a character was undeniable in comic sales and in toys, and always stayed in the mind of Avi Arad, a key producer in the early days of Marvel film and television projects, and he pushed Sam Raimi to include Venom in Spider-Man 3 in 2007. That's how we got Topher Grace's Eddie Brock. In Spider-Man 3, the Venom symbiote arrives to Earth via meteor that crash lands next to Peter and MJ and latches onto Peter's moped, and then feeds on Peter's negative emotions in that film, resulting in the black suit and a version of Peter Parker who's more aggressive and violent and, this. But I will always defend this because that is not something that the movie wants us to think is cool. It's presented as what an alien thinks a cool human would do, and that's why it's so weird and and insane, and it actually kind of works in the logic of the movie that way. In this movie, the transfer from Peter to Eddie Brock goes down mostly as it does in the 1988 storyline, and in this movie, Peter's ultimately able to destroy Venom by trapping it in a cage of bars that he strikes to form these sonic frequencies, and then ultimately blows it up with a goblin pumpkin grenade that Eddie Brock tragically jumps into at the moment of detonation. Tobey Maguire's version of Peter Parker actually brings up this fun memory in Spider-Man No Way Home.
Yeah, I fought an alien made out of black goo once.
But forcing Venom into a plot already crowded with villains, Flint Marko, Sandman, and Harry Osborn Green Goblin, made Sam Raimi's experience so unpleasant that he was totally okay parting ways with Sony for Spider-Man 4, which looked like it was going to be doing the same thing. And that led to Sony's reboot of the franchise with Mark Webb and Andrew Garfield, and after that, their collaboration with Marvel Studios in the version of Peter Parker played by Tom Holland shared by Sony and the MCU of Disney's Marvel Studios. Since Sony still owned the film adaptation rights to all of the Spider-Man associated characters, the studio still wanted to profit from these in ways that they didn't have to share with Disney, which resulted in this side strategy of solo movies centered around Spider-Man villains. And the first of those was Venom in 2018. Following the events of the Venom Lethal Protector storyline, we find Eddie Brock as a hard-hitting investigative journalist in the San Francisco area, played by Tom Hardy. Meanwhile, a private spacecraft from the Life Foundation returns to Earth and crashes in the Malaysian part of the island of Borneo. This craft contains several samples of alien symbiote fluid, and one of those samples, later referred to as Riot, escapes in the bodies of various hosts. Now, there are two things here. One, the pilot of the spacecraft is named Jameson in this movie, a reference to John Jameson, the astronaut son of Daily Bugle editor J. Jonah Jameson, and we met a different version of John Jameson in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2. And secondly, there is a very weird timeline issue here, in which the Riot symbiote gradually makes its way through Malaysia, and then this film includes a 6-month later title card in its opening act, which is then followed by Riot arriving in a San Francisco airport from Hong Kong. So that created this kind of unexplained 6-month gap, which a much younger version of me back in 2018 was way too obsessed with and explored way too deeply in a video called Where Was Riot? With 6 months in the thumbnail that years later became one of the many New Rockstars thumbnails to become a meme in certain corners of the internet. So if you ever see me or New Rockstars referenced with Venom or Riot with 6 months in bits online, that's where it came from. Anyway, the Life Foundation in the comics is a cabal of survivalist scientists that in this movie is like a tech pharmaceutical company headed by Carlton Drake, Riz Ahmed. Drake had recovered 4 symbiotes and tests them on human subjects to see if they can adapt humans to be able to survive in space, as he assumes the Earth is facing certain environmental collapse. But each human test subject he tries this on dies. So Eddie Brock learns about these deadly trials from his fiancée, Anne Wayne, played by Michelle Williams, who's a Life Foundation lawyer, and he uses this scoop while interviewing Carlton Drake. This gets both Anne and Eddie fired. Anne is so upset that she dumps Eddie and later on begins dating Dr. Dan Lewis. Eddie continues investigating the Life Foundation and breaks in using the help of a whistleblower played by Jenny Slate, and while inside the Life Foundation he accidentally bonds with one of the symbiotes. This symbiote, which goes by the name of Venom, is also voiced by Tom Hardy as a kind of alter ego with a desire to consume human flesh that Eddie tries to suppress by offering other kinds of foods like lobsters and chocolate.
So, what culinary delights will tickle the pickle tonight?
Beetle tots and chocolate.
Right, okay.
Which, in this movie, suggests that chocolate contains phenylethylamine, which is a chemical found in human brains and produces happiness and elation. So, using that logic, it should be a good substitute for biting off people's heads. But the issue is technically phenylethylamine is not in chocolate. It is produced by our brains when we eat chocolate. That's why, Professor Lupin gave Harry that loose pocket chocolate from his robes after Dementors tried to give him a kiss. We also meet in this film Eddie's local bodega shopkeep, Mrs. Chen, who weirdly becomes like one of the most important characters of this franchise. Many have argued that it is like the MCU, the Mrs. Chen universe. Venom is back, and if The Last Dance has you wishing you could keep a piece of your favorite symbiote with you a little longer, then look no further than Gentle Band's Venom-inspired ring made with real meteorite. Gentle Bands has been making rings since 2017 using unconventional materials like retired spacecraft titanium, antler, and dinosaur fossils, and of course, meteorite. Gentle Band's Eternus ring looks like it came from outer space, because it did. It combines meteorite and tungsten into a black ring with eerie blue flecks that'll make you feel like a symbiote could take over at any moment. If you're someone who prefers not to wear your rings on your fingers, Gentle Bands offers this chain so you can keep your ring close to you even when you can't have it on your finger. Gentle Bands is currently offering free engraving on all orders. Check out the Venom-inspired ring on gentlebands.com and use code NEWROCKSTARS to get a special 25% discount on your new favorite ring today. So Carlton Drake has sent Life Foundation Foundation mercenaries after Eddie, but Eddie and Venom manage to avoid capture, and some really cool visual effects sequences throughout San Francisco. But the Riot symbiote finds Drake at the Life Foundation and bonds with him. Venom describes Riot as a team leader with an arsenal of weapons, suggesting that before, all these symbiotes knew each other, that there might have been some history that could get explored in The Last Dance. Riot promises Carlton Drake that there are millions more symbiotes and that they will follow Riot wherever he leads them, and they plan to launch a rocket to the symbiote home planet to bring them all back to Earth. But we are going to see this home world of Clintar in The Last Dance, where it is actually ruled over by the symbiote god of Null. So maybe Riot was planning on just appeasing Null or overthrowing Null. We're not exactly sure. But really, Riot was created, as were all the symbiotes, by Null. So I think we have to assume that Riot was at least like an emissary from Null. At one point, Eddie is saved when Venom binds with the body of Anne, creating She-Venom. And since Venom has come to love Earth and humanity, Venom and Riot fight on the Life Foundation launch pad. Venom kills Riot and Drake by blowing up the shuttle. In this movie's post-credit scene, Eddie takes a new assignment to interview incarcerated serial killer Cletus Cassidy, setting up Woody Harrelson as the villain Carnage in the sequel. And that brings us to Venom Let There Be Carnage in 2021. This movie opens in a flashback set in 1996, where a young Cletus Cassidy lives in the St. Estes home for unwanted children, along with his lover, Francis Barrison, aka Shriek in the Marvel Comics, a mutant both in the comics and called a mutant in this film.
What did the doctor say?
He said the mutations are advancing.
While she's being transported to the Ravencroft Institute, that's the tortuous lab for enhanced individuals from Marvel Comics, also featured in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 in 2014, Frances uses her sonic scream to deafen the young cop, Patrick Mulligan, in one ear, and Mulligan shoots her in the eye, leaving her with her comic-accurate eye scarring. While Mulligan thinks she was dead, she actually survives and goes to Ravencroft. Back in the present day, following the events of the 2018 Venom film, now Detective Mulligan, played by Stephen Graham, asks Eddie to talk to Cletus Cassidy to learn where the bodies of his victims are buried, because Cletus will only talk to Eddie. Venom successfully deduces where these bodies are based on clues in Cletus's prison cell, in between quotes from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and Lord Byron's poem Prometheus. Publishing this scoop and leading cops to the bodies boosts Eddie's career, and we learn in this movie he now works for the Daily Bugle West Coast edition. Yes, this second Venom film is, interestingly, a critique of true crime journalists who become part of the stories they are covering. Cletus Cassidy gets sentenced to death, and in another visit, he bites Eddie's hand, causing some of the Venom DNA to get into his bloodstream. Venom argues with Eddie over wanting more freedom to eat human criminals, and they end up detaching from each other as Venom goes out to explore San Francisco on his own and has a lot of fun going to parties and rapping.
Diesel protector out!
During Cletus's execution via lethal injection, a red symbiote emerges from his blood vessels and blocks the injection, transforming Cletus into Carnage. It rampages through the prison, killing guards and freeing inmates. Carnage helps Cletus break Frances, who's played by Naomi Harris, out of Ravencroft, and they burn down the St. Estes home. Eddie gets arrested by Mulligan, and Anne finds Venom hopping body to body throughout San Francisco, now in the body of Mrs. Chen, in one of the funnier scenes of the film. Anne convinces the Mrs. Chen version of Venom to forgive Eddie.
Let's go save that asshole.
And brings the Venom symbiote back to Eddie to free him from the police station. Cletus takes Mulligan hostage as a wedding gift to Frances, and Frances takes Anne, and everyone ends up at the Grace Cathedral for Carnage and Shriek's wedding. Eddie and Venom arrive to fight Carnage. Frances hangs Mulligan with a chain, but at the end of this film, it's revealed he's not dead, he has survived, and his eyes are glowing blue, suggesting a transition into the symbiote Toxin, which Patrick Mulligan turns into in the comics, and we're going to see Mulligan as Toxin in The Last Dance. And this scene in Let There Be Carnage, he simply says this:
Monsters.
Maybe he's seen the other monstrous symbiotes headed to Earth in The Last Dance, or maybe the monsters he's seen are the xenophages. Venom provokes Shriek into screaming to separate Carnage from Cletus, and Venom eats Carnage and kills Cletus, while Frances dies from the collapsing cathedral. Eddie and Venom vacation Mexico and agree to work together as lethal protectors. Now, the Let There Be Carnage mid-credit scene shows Venom and Eddie in their beachside hotel room, where Venom says this:
80 billion light years of hive knowledge across universes would explode your tiny little brain.
And then, without warning, the room glows with a golden light, and furniture and wallpaper warp, and Eddie and Venom find themselves in a much nicer hotel room in a different universe, the 616 Sacred Timeline Marvel Cinematic Universe. Eddie and Venom see Peter Parker on the TV screen, the broadcast in which J. Jonah Jameson on the DailyBugle.net was outing Peter as Spider-Man to the public, which we saw in the post-credit scene of Far From Home and the opening act of Spider-Man No Way Home, and Venom licks the screen. So Let There Be Carnage ended with Venom and Eddie being in the MCU, which was, for a few months at least, a very big deal, as everyone was looking ahead to Spider-Man No Way Home, a film that was poised to feature several other cameos of heroes and villains from other universes within the multiverse. But in Spider-Man No Way Home, Venom's crossover was justified to be part of that Doctor Strange spell that went awry, but Venom does not appear at all in the main runtime of the film. He only appears in a mid-credit scene as Eddie Brock is a few drinks in at a bar for that same beachside resort as he's speaking with Danny Rojas from Ted Lasso.
The new kid, wasn't Danny what? Rojas, yeah.
About the historical highlights from the MCU. He talks about Tony Stark having died, about Hulk, about Thanos, an alien who loves stones.
Tell you what, man, aliens, they do not love stones. You know what aliens love? Eating brains.
And then Eddie says, hey, maybe we should go to New York to talk to this Spider-Man. Venom just wants to go skinny dipping, but before they can do either of those things or pay the bill, his body glows and he exits the 616 universe. But he leaves behind a piece of Venom goo on the bar top. Now, Venom the Last Dance will return to this bar as we see Chiwetel Ejiofor's character, Rex Strickland, pin that piece of goo under a container. The shot was in a trailer for the film. We're not yet clear what's going on here, but this bar must not be in the 616 MCU, because in that universe, Chiwetel Ejiofor plays the sorcerer Mordo. So The Last Dance must be establishing that there are two universes, 616 and 688, who each have the same type of bar in them, and in both of these universes, a piece of Venom goo was left behind. Like maybe after Venom was transported from the bar in 616 to this parallel bar in 688, and in both universes, pieces of Venom goo are inchworming away. But I also want to include a quick recap of events elsewhere in the Sony Universe. Morbius from 2022 ended with a post-credit scene showing Michael Keaton's Adrian Toomes Vulture, last seen in Spider-Man Homecoming in the MCU, teleporting from his prison cell in the 616 MCU to whatever Morbius's universe is. Morbius and Toomes meet. Toomes says that he's been reading up on this doctor.
I'm not sure how I got here. Has to do with Spider-Man, I think. I'm still figuring this place out, but I think a bunch of guys like us should team up.
And I don't know what that means. And then Madam Web was a story set in 2003 that features Cassandra Webb as an EMT and a friend to Ben Parker, yes, Uncle Ben, and his sister-in-law, Mary Parker, who in this film gives birth to a baby boy, Peter Parker. This movie ends with some kind of future timeline in which Madam Web is a clairvoyant leader to a team of Spider Women, including Julia Cornwall, Maddie Franklin, and Anya Corazon. But the main takeaway from Morbius and Madam Web is that these were not very good movies and very incoherent installments of a franchise with no clear vision and might never get referenced again, certainly not in Venom the Last Dance. Kraven, which comes out in December, is another swing at this formula. It might be more successful based on Aaron Taylor Johnson's performance and some thrilling R-rated violence, but I wouldn't expect any connectivity to the Venom films. Still, Sony considers the Venom side of their Spider-Verse to be sacred. In the animated Across the Spiderverse film, the Spot at one point looks through the multiverse and meets Mrs. Chen in the Venom universe of 688. And when Miguel O'Hara lectures us about the web of life and destiny, among the canon events of every Spider-Man's life is the crossing of paths with a Venom symbiote. And included in the subsections of that webbing is Tobey Maguire's moment as Peter Parker pulling off the symbiote in that 2007 Spider-Man 3 film. So here's where we stand with Venom the Last Dance. Venom and Eddie Brock are back in Universe 688 after briefly crossing over with the MCU, and Eddie Brock learned a bit about the MCU but didn't meet any of the major characters. Venom shares a history and a hive knowledge with the other symbiotes who come from the planet Clintar. We don't know exactly what Venom was doing with Riot and the other symbiotes when the Life Foundation found them in the first film. Chiwetel Ejiofor is playing Rex Strickland, who's a soldier who hunts the Venom symbiote, and in the comics, someone who gets infected by the symbiote himself. Juno Temple joins his cast, playing Dr. Payne, a scientist who studies the symbiotes. We know Detective Mulligan and Toxin will appear in this film, and that there is a new array of symbiote samples that are being studied. Andy Serkis, who directed Let There Be Carnage, is playing Null in this movie, the symbiote god, who in the Marvel Comics has a history with the Celestials and lives in a shadow realm between the 6th and 7th iteration of the universe. He's known for wielding All Black the Necker sword, a sword that he used to decapitate a Celestial, and the same sword later carried by the comics version of Gore the God Butcher from Jason Aaron's Thor comics. But the sword carried by Christian Bale's Gore and Thor Love and Thunder was not that same sword. Null commands these creatures called the Xenophages. These are hunter-tracker beasts, metamorphs who don't feel pain and feast on symbiotes' brains. And Tom Hardy, as well as this movie's director Kelly Marcel, have confirmed that this will be Tom Hardy's final film as Eddie Brock, but that Sony still has plans for the symbiotes in future films.
Well, you know, you're not really saying goodbye to Venom, you're saying hello to the last dance, and And I don't think it's over for Venom. Like, you know, there's so much more to do with him.
Indicating that we could see some new form of Venom with a different host in Spider-Man 4. So New Rockstars is a pretty busy week this week. Tomorrow night, Wednesday night, will be our Agatha Episode 7 reaction with myself and Jessica Clemons. Thursday, we will release our Venom The Last Dance ending and post-credit scenes explained video. So if you see Venom on Thursday night, just come over here. We'll explain everything you don't get about those. But also Thursday, 11 a.m. over on the Break Room channel will be our Agatha Episode 7 live stream Q&A. On Friday will be our Agatha Episode 7 Easter egg breakdown and analysis. And then on Saturday will be our Easter egg breakdown and analysis of Venom The Last Dance. And then on Sunday will be our weekly sneak peek show where we will look ahead to the future of fandom. A big thanks to Noah Chen for his help with this video. Comment down below with your thoughts. Follow me at EA Voss and subscribe to all 3 channels in the New Rockstars network for breakdowns and news coverage of everything you love. Thanks for watching and I'll see you next time. Bye.